All right, we are live, right? Just checking. Okay, I got the thumbs up. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to our session of Ask the Expert. We are actually joined today with a very masterful governance and compliance guy, Alfred Ayala, which we're going to basically talk about CMMC and governance compliance. We're D1 Defend. I'm Eddie Darmawan, founder and chief security officer of D1 Defend. We are an IT MSP based out of, well, now it's going to be Rancho Cucamonga. And we do help small, medium businesses to protect themselves from cyber risk. And again, our special guest, Mr. Alfred Ayala. He has 20 plus years of experience in financial services, technology, risk management, a lot of like geeky abbreviations there, but again, compliance programs, safeguards, frameworks. It's going to be a good topic, possibly boring, but exciting. AI ethics, which I know some of you guys are probably questioning, like, is it safe? Risk management controls. And Alfred's going to bring us into that. Alfred, do you want to introduce yourself real quick and just tell us your
Absolutely.
expertise?
Eddie, thank you for having me. Welcome to everyone here. We look forward to engaging the cybersecurity community. Alfred Ayala, based here in Southern California, been in the cybersecurity risk management space for 20 plus years with a background not only in financial services, aerospace defense, healthcare, and financial services. Our firm has existed since 1984. We have about 4,100 specialists and advisors in regulatory compliance, cybersecurity, risk management, and data privacy. And we're mostly called to advise firms, mostly medium to large firms that are engaging governmental agencies for contracts, and including today's topic, a number of aerospace defense clients that have contracts with the federal government. So what we do is actually help companies assess their status, help them build the framework, and make sure they're ready to operationalize their cybersecurity plan.
Right on. Thank you, Alfred. And us guys, D1 Defend, we help small businesses apply these security controls that actually Alfred kind of hammers down to us to actually apply. Again, we're following these different types of frameworks. So as people are trickling in here, and just want to welcome everybody again. This is an Ask the Expert session, so it will be Q&A. We would love for questions to come up. So please raise your digital hands, or if you guys have your camera on, just wave profusely, and maybe Shanta will see you and she'll make your mic live and go from there. We'll also have a chat also um, to ask the questions. Sorry guys, I think I'm having a little too much coffee here this morning. But talking to Alfred just makes me nervous every time. He's always policing us, so that's. But we need that. We need that. All right. So Shanta, I know we just started. I know it's not even 5 minutes yet, but do we have any questions in the audience about what CMMC or governance and compliance is in regards to their business?
As we wait for questions to tee up, you think about CMMC in general, it's a cybersecurity framework. It's about ensuring that, in this case, Department of Defense, now Department of War, contractors and subprime contractors, prime and non-prime contractors, are protecting the data that they're entrusted, and that they have some form of classification of that data and controls around who accesses the data and where they're storing that data, etc. With CMMC, there are roughly 110 controls. But if you look at how assessors and firms like ours go in, what we do is ultimately look at the whole security landscape, which can end up being about 320 controls that are being reviewed. One, to ensure they exist. Two, that they have been implemented. And three, ultimately, are they effective? Are they being utilized in the right fashion? And most importantly, the documentation around these controls. A lot of firms simply don't have the necessary documentation. The other consideration here is there sometimes is a confusion around, well, I'm in the cloud space and I have a FedRAMP certification. Therefore, I should be okay with CMMC. And the answer is not necessarily. FedRAMP only applies to cloud solutions or cloud vendors dealing with contracts in all federal government agencies. CMC is specific to DoD or Department of War contractors, including primes and non-primes.
That's interesting you mentioned that. So, if you were a business that actually has, I guess, sell SaaS solutions or has subscription models that is quote unquote within the cloud or within an internal or private cloud, do they fall under that FedRAMP law or do they require the CMMC?
So it depends on what agency they're doing the work for. The answer is they may end up having to meet both certification programs. So a FedRAMP because they have solutions on the cloud and they're offering cloud solutions to a federal government agency. CMMC applies if they're doing any Department of War, Department of Defense contracts with, for example, a major aircraft manufacturer or a satellite manufacturer, etc.
Okay. Wow. Well, one of the, I guess, the biggest challenges then, I mean, comes to our first question, right? Which I'm gonna tee up here, and I see people are still joining. Welcome, everybody. I know we're only like 7 minutes in, but I am just jumping in here. So, what is CMMC, and why do I need it, Alfred?
So CMMC is a cybersecurity model, basically that requires contractors of the Department of War, Department of Defense, and it doesn't matter what size you are, whether you're a large global aerospace defense manufacturer that has prime contracts, or you are a subcontractor to one of those primes. If you are handling uh, any kind of data, schematics, drawings, etc., that are subject to some kind of control, you would need eventually a cybersecurity security plan. You would additionally need to ensure that you are going towards certification. CMMC has existed for a couple of years now, and in theory, companies have been on an honor system. But now, regulators, assessors, which are called C3PAOs, they're basically the regulators that come in and verify. What they're saying is, okay, you told us that you met the requirements. Now we're going to require you to prove through documentation, evidence that says that you have security controls in place, that you've walled off certain data, and it's not classified data. So there's a distinction here. So if data is secret, confidential, top secret, etc., those are referred to as classified data. Classified data is completely different regimen. This is non-classified data, but it's still controlled. Again, information such as schematics and drawings that will be identified in a scope of work. So today, if you're going after a contract with a federal agency or a prime that has a contract with a federal agency, you're going to have to prove before contract award that you have the security controls in place and that you have been CMMC certified.
So that's actually very interesting, and we're going to talk about the classified and unclassified and what governs that, right? I want to ask you. You mentioned the C3PAO is now in effect. Are these C3PAOs or auditors, I should say, right? Are
Right.
they more government entities or are they private companies that actually audit businesses that require the CMMC? And FYI, guys, for people that don't know, CMMC, the cool abbreviation stands for Cyber Maturity Model Certification. And so yeah, Alfred, if you can help answer that, who is actually the C3PAO? Are they the government entities? Are they private? And do they actually stamp that business certified?
So their role effectively is that of an auditor or an assessor. They're to do security assessments on the status of your program, if you have one. If you don't have one, then part of the acronym there, maturity, is where are you at in the scale of maturity. And so most of the C3PAOs are private companies that are authorized to review and certify, and they are attesting to the contracting government agency that your program exists, it meets a certain level of security, and most of the time it's going to be a level 2. There are several levels, but most companies will be at a level 2. And so the answer to your question, Eddie, is they are mostly private assessors, firms that are authorized to review the program. They have the subject matter expertise, and small, medium businesses have contracted them to help get through the certification process.
Interesting. So how do businesses know that, oh crap, I got to get CMMC? What would trigger that? Like, do they get
the,
like
the,
a nasty letter? Is there a contract saying like, hey, we're gonna halt your operation until you get this bloody thing? Talk to me about that.
well, so as of November, you will not be awarded a contract. Notice I said will not be awarded a contract in the future on a move forward basis if you do not have the CMMC certification. So you might have, for example, a FedRAMP certification because you're in the cloud space, but the nuance is distinctly different for getting the CMMC certification. So if you are bidding for a contract where the regimen of CMMC exists, then that is a trigger. If you already have a contract and you've been telling the agency or the prime, again, maybe that major aircraft manufacturer, the satellite manufacturer, etc., that you are fully prepared and quote unquote certified, they can come in and say, all right, provide the evidence, provide the documentation that access controls exist, that you're
Mm,
that there's a walled garden, that the data is restricted to, for example, you have, let's say, 100 employees in your company, all 100 do not need access, maybe only 10. So you have to look at the master services agreement or the scope of work of the contract you already have. And typically it stipulates that you are under the CMMC requirements. And you may have already been telling the prime or the government agency, we are certified. Well, now you're going to have to provide that evidence. It's not enough to attest or to say that you're certified. Now you're going to have to provide the assessments, the security plan, and the testing. That might even include pen testing, for example.
yeah. Wow. It's funny you mentioned pen testing. I know there's like several different pen tests nowadays, and it's getting complicated. So what really, well, let me try to rephrase my question here. What 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 pen tests are acceptable by CMMC standards?
So the answer is it depends. Again, you have to look at the scope of work or the master services agreement, with either the prime or the direct government agency. And for this exercise, we're talking about, no pun intended, we're talking about the Department of War. So you might be a contractor building satellite components, aircraft components, or cloud solutions, etc. And so the type of pen testing will vary. And that's where
Interesting.
the C3 PAO is going to come in and assist you in determining, because you might say, here's the pen testing we've done, and they're going to determine the adequacy. Because ultimately it's going to look at what data do you have access to, and that will drive the level or the type of pen testing you need to do. So this is going to be driven by the type of data and the project you're working on.
Gotcha. So I mean, like for instance, we use a vulnerability testing solution. It is considered a penetration testing, but it's actually it simulates a phishing attack. And if someone actually clicks on the link from the inside, how much of your data internally is exposed? And it scares the bejesus out of people every time we show that report. Um, but again, like sometimes I feel like, hey, is this pen test, quote unquote, good enough? Or should we just even categorize it as a vulnerable test, right? But real quick, I just want to ask the audience, does anybody right now work with prime contractors or direct or indirect with the government?
Coherence with the system administration with Alfred and Eddie. I guess my first question is that during the department infrastructure and implementing of such things, I think that the manufacturing scope timeline actually aligns to such description. So going into, for example, cloud solutions, I guess my first question would be, what sort of timeline do we look for CMMC abbreviations, testing, and also for policies adherence?
So you're going to think of 180 days. The default tends to be 180 days. And since the citations came out in October, here in early November, you're going to look at Q1 and Q2 of 26 to be a highlight for many contractors. And you need to be able to illustrate incremental progress. And when they talk about incremental progress, that's development cycles. So typically that's 1 month, 45 days, 60 days, 90 days, 120, 180. But the magic number is 180 days. And so long as you can illustrate through documentation, evidence, that you have made steady progress, maybe you've not completed all the requirements, but that you have worked on it based on a published security plan, you will be perfectly fine. That's why that collaboration with the C3 PAO is so important. Keeping in mind that you are in line with thousands of contractors. I believe the number is close to 80,000 contractors across the country fall into
Wow.
these requirements. Does that help?
So
Thank you. That answered my question.
how does one find a C3PAO? I know it sounds very Star Warsy, but how does one find that? Like legitimately, right? I mean, is there some type of seal we're looking for?
So they do go through they do themselves go through their own regimen of certification and proving that they understand not only the requirements, but that they have the ability to test through GRCs, governance risk assessment, getting all the acronyms mixed up here. Governance risk compliance platforms. So software programs that integrate or aggregate all these traditional silos that include the IT function, the security function, the compliance function, the legal department, the engineers, etc. So a C3 PAO has gone through the requirements. They have worked with the contracting agencies, in this case, the Department of War, and they have met themselves certain levels of requirements. And typically they're going to have partners or solutions in the GRC space. Solutions like us here at Strategic GRC, solutions with other prime contractors that you have to be prepared to sort of get in line. And if you're a existing contractor or you're looking to bid for contracts, you're going to be in that space. So therefore, you're going to know, all right, I need to find an assessor. So collectively, they're referred to as assessors, or the common word auditor. They're auditors effectively, but they are preparing you hopefully in advance. And so the answer to your question really lies in how much preparation are you doing as either a prime or subprime contractor? And the folks that you're going to end up working with are these C3 PAOs. And you're going to know who they are because they're the ones that are also helping you build out your GRC platform. They're the ones looking at how effective are the controls? Do you have controls in place? Are those controls dynamic? Are they evolving with the regulation, etc.? Does that make sense?
Yeah, and it also determines their framework as well, right? So
Right.
for those that don't know, C3PAO, no, it's not that gold robot from Star Wars. It actually stands for Certified Third Party Assessor Organization, and this is strange, but so CMMC back, this was like 2-3 years ago. They had an accreditation body, right? CMMC AB, but it was never activated. And this is why people got confused on this a lot of times, Alfred. I remember in our industry, the MSP industry, when the word CMMC came out, everybody jumped on that bloody bandwagon, right? Like, okay, how do we do this? How do we get on this? But then when we register for the accreditation body, like it just says, okay, we'll contact you. I feel like it wasn't real, but now it's actually pretty official. Is that a correct statement?
Absolutely. Now the pedal hits the metal, and you now have to provide evidence. And the challenge, as I said earlier, is there are thousands of firms that are now not only seeking certification, but even before you get to the certification, building out the evidence, the documentation. And that's even true for the assessors. So the assessors are getting bombarded. They're getting huge volumes of requests. So that's why I tell folks, you need to get in line as quickly as possible. If you're looking at, for example, a project in Q3 of 26, you should be getting ready now and developing your scope of work with the assessor.
Yeah, and I understand it takes a long time. There's a lot of controls that you need to be looking at. And so, well, before I get into the next question, because it does kind of segue into this, are there any questions in the chat, Shanta, or any in the Q&A? Or anybody else wants to just unmute and ask a question?
Yeah, absolutely. Comments, feedback, etc., and how it might apply to your business.
Just
We
not
do have
hurtful
one
comments.
here.
Okay.
We have Rita, and oh, she's asking if do we have this, Eddie?
Is that Rita from Superior?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, Rita. I don't think you guys deal with government contracts. At least not that we know of. At least not what was communicated to me. So you don't need to have this requirement.
Okay.
Well, and thank you for asking that question, because we don't want to overwhelm ourselves. Let's keep to the basics or the fundamentals of what it means to protect the data we're entrusted. And
Yes.
so our external customers, whether you're a government contractor or not, expect that any information you're collecting, and we'll go beyond Department of War type contracts and just look at the basics, personally identifiable information, or PII. like your name, your address, your birth date, your social security number. If you're a company that serves consumers, you're entrusted with this data and you're expected to have a security regimen. So let's focus on the fundamentals of how you're walling off this information and limiting who has access to it. One, you should only be collecting the data you need to render a product or service. Two, you should ensure that access controls are in place, including two-factor authentication. And then three, is that data resident or subject to controls on where the cloud solution or your servers are in the United States or in some foreign jurisdiction? So when we talk about CMMC, this is specific to Department of Defense, Department of War contractors. You might think of a Boeing or a SpaceX, or you may be working with NASA, some defense contractor that's building satellites, etc. And I hope that helps. Eddie?
Yeah, no, I love keeping it simple. So if CMMC only falls under those guidelines. Now, I'm curious. Obviously, small businesses require some type of framework, right? And this might be just overkill. Let's face it, right? This might be just overkill. Now, is it good to have people apply it? Yeah, of course. But is following this 800-171 good enough? Is that because that's a typical standard framework that is provided by the National Institute of Standards and Technology. So is that good enough, Alfred? Or how much does the 800-171 apply to CMMC or perhaps other frameworks?
So you're talking about commonalities between the two, and there's a lot of overlap. So if you are following, for example, FedRAMP versus NIST versus ISO 27000.1, the reality is there are nuanced differences, but the fundamentals are the same. There's more common than not. When you think of CMMC, though, the core 110 controls, when the C3PAO is doing an assessment, they're going to do a crossover. And by the time you're done with your assessment, you're really getting an assessment of about 320 controls. So when you think about NIST or ISO, let's not boil the ocean. The reality is, look at what data you're collecting. What is the expectation of the contractee or the contract, or depending on your role? So are you contracting with a state agency, a county agency, or a federal agency? And that will drive the framework, again, whether it's ISO or NIST. So if you're dealing with, for example, international clients, then ISO might be a trigger. Maybe you're doing business in Canada, for example, or in Europe, or even in Latin America. But at the end of the day, this is about understanding the data you're collecting, how you collect that data, where that data resides, and then what controls do you have in place for privilege to the information? Meaning, again, in the example, I have 100 employees. All 100 employees do not need access to every single data element. So data classification is important. And so who I give privilege to is critical. And then the documentation around that. It's not enough to say I know or that we're doing it. Is that, do you have the evidence in your security plan? And then are your employees trained to these standards? Do they understand the policies around these controls and how it applies to them? So when you think about going to the core of your question, Eddie, the differences between the frameworks such as NIST or ISO, then you look at FedRAMP versus CMMC, the fundamentals are almost identical. What is different is how they apply. What is different is how they are assessed. But before
Gotcha.
you can even go through that, figure out what type of business you are, who are your customers, and what data you are collecting.
I like that. And that's just to remind everybody, that's how we help. Okay. This is my shameless plug, but this is how we help. We help identify those things. We help identify your data, and we help identify the compliance requirements that you may or may not need. So yeah, let's not do an overkill. I like that statement that Alfred said. Let's not boil the ocean. My goodness, sounds horrible. But speaking of classifying data, let's go to our next slide here. What is considered classified versus unclassified, and who determines that?
So when we talk about classified, a lot of people think of confidential, secret, top secret, final secret. Those level of classifications are not impacted directly by CMMC requirements because they fall on an entirely different regimen that is far more strict. What we're talking about is controlled unclassified information, which is a lesser or lower level of restriction. And that might include schematics or drawings. Maybe you're making one element of a satellite or an aircraft or a military vehicle. And the schematics might be controlled, for example, as it relates to import-export controls, etc. So most companies that have contracts with the Department of War, DoD, are going to fall on what's called a level 2 advanced requirement, which means they have to have comprehensive policies, they have to have two-factor authentication, centralized logging, incident response, etc. And in terms of who determines the classification of the data, the government agency, the Department of War, is the one that will determine the classification. And that is going to be outlined in your MSA, your Master Services Agreement, or your scope of work. So you're going to know in advance before even being awarded a contract. If you already have a contract, then you should already know, for example, that you need a CMMC certification and that you're going to be in a level 2 status because of the type of data you're handling.
Nice. Thank you for that. I'm going to open up again, guys. Any questions coming from the audience? This is very interesting topic. I haven't seen anybody drop off yet, so it's people are engaged, which is great. Not falling
They're in,
asleep, hopefully.
they're in listen and learn. They're in listen and learn mode. Eddie, let me ask you.
Yeah.
Because you operationalize a lot of these controls. We go in and we're the auditors. We're going in to review. Ultimately, do the controls exist? What is the maturity of those controls, etc. But when you think about when you're out in the field with your clients, whether they're Department of War contractors or maybe some other federal agency, maybe they're using a cloud solution. But when you think about the operationalization of any of these frameworks, earlier you mentioned NIST 800-171. What is the easiest way to operationalize these controls? When you think about policies, MFA, logging, incident response, we talked about pen testing. Let's talk a little bit about that aspect because a lot of companies struggle with just doing that, operationalization. Eddie?
Absolutely. It's a great question, Alfred. So we do follow a foundational standard and we base it off the NIST 800-171. It does cover a lot of security requirements and the certification requirements. So you're right. You're absolutely right in that overlay that one security control can cover multiple different frameworks as well as multiple categories within the framework. So we have a standard that we adhere to. Obviously, the most important thing, and you mentioned it earlier, is let's discover what you really need, right? If you're, let's just say, I don't know, like a salon, right? What kind of data are you really saving in that salon? Yes, you use a crazy POS system or whatever, but what is the data besides PCI compliance maybe that you need to adhere to? Right. So we need to understand that before implementing a lot of these solutions that people don't really necessarily need. So it's good to work with somebody that actually asks the right question and tries to understand your business operations. Therefore, the right things can be applied. Does that answer the question, Alfred?
Yes, and rather it's in your example, a salon that's using a point of sale system or a government contractor. We got to stick to the principles, universal common denominators or universal baselines around data inventory. So, and I don't want to get geeky here as you used that term earlier, but understanding not only what data you're collecting, but why are you collecting that data and how does it affect your ability to provide a product or service to your customers. That
Yeah.
is so important in not summarily just collecting tons of data because quote unquote, we can, because that will get you in trouble later on down the line, particularly with data privacy rules and regulations that vary by state jurisdiction. So collect only the data you need to render your product or service. That's the first part. The other part is understanding if you're a contractor for any government agency, focus on the master services agreement and the scope of work and what are the stipulations or requirements for how data is handled, where it's to be resident, and then ultimately doing an inventory of that data. Yes, an inventory of the data and understanding what exactly and how much do you have? And oh, by the way, how long are you going to keep that data? What is the retention period for that data?
Yeah. Let's go back. Let's chat about PII, right? Private
Mhm.
information. Since we're talking about salons that probably collect your name, your phone number, right? Which is considered a PII. Now, what rights do they actually have to that data? Because let's face it, our name is public information, right? Our phone numbers are public information. Heck, I get like 30 spam calls just this morning. Like it's wild. Like what the heck happened there? Like who I don't remember accepting any agreements saying that, hey, I'm going to share your data. Or maybe I overlooked it because who the heck reads the EULA, right? The end user license agreement when those things pop up. But what can we do about that? Or what can companies do when they do collect it? Like, do they have a responsibility for that data? Because it doesn't seem like they do.
So we're talking about privacy rules and regulations, which are all over the board. Every state, because there's not a federal privacy regulation. So in California, it's CCPA or CPRA, the California Consumer Privacy Act, which is very similar to the European Union's GDPR. And what that effectively says is that, again, you cannot arbitrarily collect data. You must get consent. Well, to your point earlier, frequently we all arbitrarily give consent because we want that product or service for free. Well, it's not free. You are effectively giving away your information and oftentimes basically allowing them to use the data. And because you did not really understand the EULA or the privacy policy, etc., you end up getting calls, you end up getting emails or solicitations in general. And so understanding the opt-out provisions versus opt-in. So in the past, you were automatically opted in. As a result of privacy regulations like CCPA and GDPR, now you must opt in. Well, the challenge with that is if you don't opt in, you will not be granted access to that product or service. For example, an app on your phone. And you say, oh, I want that free service. Well, again, it's not really free if you're entitling them to use your data, your name, your phone number, your email, even your birth date, and sometimes even a social security number. That is not directly tied to CMMC, but that speaks to the fundamentals of understanding what your customer expects in terms of how data is used and how data is protected and how long that data is to be saved or retained.
All right. That was a long-winded answer for that, but yeah, thank you for that. Thank you for sharing that. Guys, I'm going to leave it up for questions. Yeah, come on.
Comments?
Rants?
What industry are some of these folks in?
I don't know. Can we take a poll? Well, I asked the question earlier. Is anybody dealing with government, federal, state, municipals? Anyone raising their hands?
This is Juan Arvalo, working for QualPro here in Los Angeles, California. And along with Sam and Isidro, we are working together to collaborate, enhance, and also to deploy the system integration for NIST 800 for aerospace and defense. So that's us.
Right on.
So when you think about your maturity, if you were to rate your maturity, where are you at on that scale?
We have not yet raised the maturity rate yet because it's not deployed. We're working on that request right now.
So you're at the beginning stages.
That is correct.
What's most important at beginning stages then is, again, look at the scope of work, the SOW or the MSA, have a direct relationship with the contracting agency or the prime, and ultimately know what data it falls under CUI, meaning that it's controlled, but it's unclassified. And that might be drawings, schematics, etc. And don't boil the ocean. Focus on walling off that data. And part of the wall off is, again, the easy example, I have 100 employees. Not all 100 employees are working on that project. So which employees are working on that project, whether it's engineers, marketing folks, it's designers, etc., and segment those off from a privilege standpoint. Does that make sense?
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you. And in accordance with COI material, I know that there is a difference between classified and unclassified. Concerning COI material, what is the insight as far as deployment? Does it also come included with the package deployment? Is there a difference between the timeline between CUI, classified and unclassified data, or are they all cumulative together, making an adherence to be able to deploy both systems?
For CMMC, the answer is across the board it applies, meaning that the standard is the same, because the assumption is that eventually you're going to come across the different layers of data, and therefore you need to follow those initially those 110 controls and eventually the 320 total controls. And as Eddie was saying earlier, one control or one test might meet multiple standards, but it's one universal application in terms of timeline and certification.
Thanks.
Juan, if I may ask, what triggered you to actually implement that? Like, obviously, because you are working with Department of Defense and whatnot, but or the aerospace, but what triggered? Like, did they send you a letter? Did they say, like, to renew the contract, you need to be certified?
That is correct. We have high-level contracts and then additional contracts that we're working on. So those contracts need to meet the necessary criteria.
Gotcha. Interesting. Okay.
Right. And oftentimes that's, if that's not coming from the contracting agency, it's going to come from the prime. Let's say I have a contract with a prime, I'll throw out Boeing or Lockheed Martin or SpaceX. They are under the eyes or under assessment themselves. So they'll say, our program is solid. We are at a level 3 as an example, but we're going to require all our vendors, our suppliers, all our third parties to be at a level 2, which is where most will fall in. And they're going to send that love note out and say, show us your evidence, show us your security plan, your training, that you have deployed two-factor authentication, that you've walled off the data, that you've restricted who has access to the data, etc. And yeah, so that letter is going to likely come from the prime, if not the contracting agency themselves.
Yeah. We have a
Thank you.
question from Sam. Go ahead, Sam. Oh, maybe he was stretching, raised his hand. I don't know. Sam, are you?
I'm good.
Oh, okay. All right. All right. Okay. Well, guys, we're nearing the end here. 15 minutes. Any additional questions? I mean, honestly, the slide deck that we prepared was just simple questions that we've already actually gone through, and I'm pretty sure we don't want to bore everybody with it again. But I'm going to leave it up for questions. Any more questions, guys?
So Eddie, as you
Crickets.
think about
Yeah.
going out in the field, most companies that are impacted already know. So they already
Yes.
know that they are required to obtain a certification. The challenge is they don't know how to go about it, or they are in line. And the other big challenge, particularly for small, medium businesses, and typically those are the subprime contractors that are doing a lot of the legwork and the smaller component development and manufacturing, is that they may want to do it, but they don't know how, and they don't have the expertise in-house. They might have one IT or security professional, and that security professional is already beyond capacity. So here's where you look outside of your organization and you bring in fractional experts to incrementally help you build out the controls, gather the evidence, and yes, audit or assess the status of your program, identify gaps. So I call that the canary in the coal mine. So in the old days, they would send a bird into the coal mine, usually a yellow canary, and if it came out alive, you're good. If it came out with a little soot, okay, there's some potential issues. If it didn't come out at all, oh my goodness, you have some issues, and we probably shouldn't send Eddie into the mine because he may not make it back out.
Or send them in anyways. I don't know.
Yeah, if they don't like you, they send you in anyways. But the point to this is that a lot of organizations that are already engaged in these contracts understand that the requirements are in their midst. And they've been saying, we know we're good to go. What Department of War is saying now is, all right, prove it. And that's where the companies are having challenges, is the documentation around policies, procedures, training, classification of data, walling off the data, MFA, incident response, etc. So, Eddie, talk a little bit about the services that you are deploying within your firm and helping from a fractional perspective, because a lot of companies will say, well, we don't have the budget for someone to do this full time. So therefore, we don't have the FT in-house,
Yes.
but we might need to bring someone on a project basis. Eddie?
Yeah, and I think the project basis would be the most ideal. It again, depending how big you guys are, right? If you guys can afford the dollars to hire somebody full time to actually just be dedicated to this, that's fantastic. But it's going to take just more than one person, in my opinion. It takes a whole department. We actually have a question that came in that's related to your question, Alfred. How can small businesses in the supply chain prepare for compliance without huge budgets? And that's true. You bring in that fractional services. So that's when we come in to basically assess the situation first. We actually have a client. They erect antennas. And one of the contracts was from a big phone carrier. I'm not going to say the name, but a big phone carrier came down and basically handed them this document of requirements. Now, the good thing is they only had to attest to it. Like, do we have these controls in place? And we helped them get to that point, to get these controls in place, and we could attest to it. That carrier company actually responded back, okay, prove it, just like what you mentioned, prove it. And we basically provide them the documentation and the evidence behind it. And again, we're just following based on the 800-171 rules. Every customer that we have, or every client that we work with, depending on their needs, we try to follow to that adherence of that 800-171 framework.
Right.
So it'll help you. I think the easiest way is, our goal is to make sure that you are cyber insurable. And being cyber insurable gets you towards that point, or that step towards the CMMC compliance, even SOC 2, right? And that's more of a common thing nowadays. Everybody's talking about it. That SOC 2 compliant, being SOC 2 compliance is somewhat going to be the standard, in my opinion, in the next couple of years here. Even I don't know if you guys heard of global, what is it? What are they called now? They used to be CompTIA. Now they're GTIA, which Global Technical Industry and Standards, or something like
Right.
that. I completely
Right.
forgot. But they have a cyber assurance program, or a Trustmark cyber assurance program, that honestly is exactly like SOC 2 framework, or the SOC 2 compliant requirements. And that SOC 2 compliant requirement also ties into the CMMC. So,
Correct.
guys,
Their underwriting is effectively another form of assessment.
Yeah, that's true.
Yes, and when you think about the small, medium business that's trying to meet these requirements, ensuring that there's collaboration between your general counsel, the law department, the attorney, the compliance officer, the security officer, the CTO, the technology officer, or the chief information officer, even the sales force, particularly in smaller firms, you might be wearing multiple hats. So that cross collaboration, making sure you're all on the same page, is absolutely critical. No one can be off on their own, just doing something without ensuring that it falls within the scope of the contract, that in fact we're not violating a particular rule in terms of access control, etc. So the first suggestion again is get rid of the silos, get rid of the breakdown in functions, create bridges. The other piece of this is automate, rinse and repeat, make it scalable and repeatable. And that means bring in a GRC system, a governance risk compliance system, that again helps you break down the barriers from these different cross functions. And you can do this on a template that you then customize. You tailor to your business needs and your operations. You bring in a fractional expert, someone from D1 Defend or Strategic GRC, so someone on Eddie's team or our team here. You bring them on board, for the duration of implementation or launch. And then the effort goes to you, the company or the client, to carry the baton forward. Don't drop the baton. Once it's built out, it's not one and done. You got to keep going. Does that make sense, Eddie?
That makes sense. And just to touch on that GRC platform that Alfred's talking about, all it is a glorified Excel sheet that keeps records on each security controls that you apply that applies to that checklist that CMMC requires. We actually have a question here. I know we're cutting out on time, but for which industries adopt CMMC standards, or which industries beyond defense contracting are starting to adopt CMMC standards? You want to take that one, Alfred?
Sure. You're going to see aerospace, aviation, and companies, satellite, anyone that's doing contracts, for example, with NASA, contracts with even the Weather Service, for example. I think that seems kind of odd, but I seen that here a short while ago. And because they're speaking to the fundamentals and they're anticipating future opportunities. So if you're thinking about that crossover of not what business I did yesterday or what business I'm doing now, but I'm looking at a bit, contracts that I might bid for in Q3 of 26, then yeah, you're going to see non-traditional defense contractors in aviation, in exploration, satellite, even telco or communications that are doing this, because once they've met the requirement or gone through the gauntlet, which takes time, expertise, and yes, budget, they're going to say, okay, now we have to have that ROI. So, they said, we don't have the contracts today, but we're preparing for the contracts down the road. So, again, those industries are going to be largely in the tech industry, aerospace, along with aviation, exploration, telco. In some cases, you might even see the fintechs or financial services firms doing it as well.
I'm so glad that the government is actually pushing on this, because we're so dependent on our technology nowadays, and everybody's just using it willy-nilly, like IoT, and they just don't consider the protection. So I'm glad this is happening. It sucks. I know it sucks for those companies that are requiring, but honestly, our infrastructure here in America has been attacked, our critical infrastructure, our water irrigation system, our water filtering system has been attacked. And I think CMMC should apply to all as a basic standard to ensure your cybersecurity protected. It's
right.
Very, very crucial.
The requirements can be a bit onerous. Having said that, if you stick to the fundamentals, you keep yourself honest, and you say, I understand what data I'm collecting. I'm collecting that data with a purpose, and I'm fulfilling my fiduciary responsibility as a company to all my stakeholders to ensure that data is protected.
Yeah. Alfred, I'm going to stop you right there. We're at the top of the hour. Guys, these are QR codes to download some free materials. Of course, the one on the left-hand side here is Cybersecurity Essentials. But if you want to get the nitty-gritty of like this CMMC governance and whatnot, Alfred has actually provided a nice document to follow through there. Again, I'm closing this webinar out, guys. I appreciate your time. I'm actually shocked that a lot of people stayed on and not dropped off, because a lot of people get glossed over because of this subject. So again, guys, thank you for attending. This link is going to be, or this webinar is actually going to be applied on YouTube as well pretty soon. Link will be provided to those who all attended. And special thanks to Mr. Alfred Ayala for attending this and answering these hard questions for us. So appreciate it, Alfred, and hopefully we can do this again very soon.
Thank you, Eddie. Always a pleasure to collaborate.
All right, guys. You guys, everybody make it a great day, and we'll see you soon on the Ask the Expert webinars. Thank you.